Awesome. And then I'm going to oh, got a little mad at me. Give me 1 second. I'm gonna stop sharing and then change this view real quick. There we go. Awesome. Okay, here we go. So, welcome again. My name is T. Ames. I'm very excited to be teaching this April session of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Volunteer Training here at Live Arts. This month's topic, we're talking about the road to dismantling white supremacy culture. So we're going to be talking about DEI today and allyship and how they relate to theatrical spaces. All right. So agenda for today, as always, I will start with introductions, a little bit about myself and about what we're doing when we're here. Then we'll move into our March session review. So what we talked about last month. Basically, review really does, I'm trying my best to work our way through. So from the first session all the way up to the present time. And then we'll really dive into DEI and what DEI is, why it's important, really breaking it down to its basics, because a lot of times we hear DEI and don't know what people are actually talking about or what we should be talking about. And then we'll move into the definition of allyship and just a sort of brief introduction into allyship. And then next session will be more of a part 2 into allyship. And then we'll go into the questions and dialogue. So the section of all of this that's me talking usually lasts about 30 to 35 minutes, and then we'll leave the second half for questions and comments and for us to really start having a conversation about what we've seen today. So let's go ahead and get started. To begin, again, my name is T. Ames. I use they, them, theirs pronouns, and I'm the education director here at Live Arts. I graduated from Oberlin College with a BA in theater and Africana studies. And I have worked with many folks far and wide when it comes to DEI and training within DEI, including wonderful people like Dr. Kelly Palmer, Matthew Reynolds, and also folks over with Theater Intimacy Education. I also was a Black history teacher at a local high school here in Charlottesville for 2 years, where I curated a curriculum using a DEI lens. So we talked about Black history as a case study using DEI. I also served as a faculty DEI coordinator for 1 year, 1 school year. So I've been surrounded by this DEI world for at least 4 or 5 years now. And so I'm excited to be able to talk more about it in these training sessions. As always, our session guidelines for today. We ask that all participants please mute themselves during the session. Again, there'll be plenty of time at the end for some dialogue. Please, I encourage you to take notes. If writing notes down does not work for you, that's totally fine. You will still receive this recording at the end of today's session. So do not worry if taking notes is something that's more challenging for you in the moment. I ask that all participants please listen for the sake of comprehension, not response. I know it's really easy to get caught up in what we're thinking and feeling in the moment, and I think it's so important to process and feel those feelings, but responding out of that process rather than responding out of a grounded state of thinking and of trying to figure out what you actually want to say can be harder. So I ask that we listen and respond for comprehension and not just, oh, I'm feeling this, and so I have to get out those feelings and project those onto someone else. And lastly, it's very much okay and accepted in this space to be uncomfortable. All the things that we talk about in these volunteer sessions are not necessarily uncommon, but they can be things that make us really think about who we are and what we believe. And that's important. That's really the first step in DEI, is taking a look at who we are and where we come from and where those belief systems come from. So I encourage you to feel any sort of feelings that you're feeling in this moment and throughout today's session, because your perspective is always valid. All right, let's jump in. I have my own set of notes. If you hear pages turning, that's all that is. All right, so reviewing from our last few sessions, we started off this conversation in January about power dynamics in theater. So the basics of this is remembering that Western ideas of progress have always created a distinct binary in our world. And by our world, I mean our Western world. So United States of America, Europe, we would consider that the Western world, the world that conquered a lot of the indigenous or Eastern world. We've got agents as one part of that binary. So those are people who have and maintain progress. And then we have targets, people who have power used against them by agents. And by definition, they are considered impeding progress that agents are making. Agent target dynamics are always amplified in theatrical spaces simply because we all love theater so much and love what we do. And so that raises the stakes of everyday scenarios to an unbelievable level. So that agent target dynamic becomes even more distinctive and important to identify. White supremacy and white supremacy culture have been synonymous with American culture since the United States inception. We talked about this last session, but basics of that, because white supremacy has to do with more than just race. It really is the culture of how power and privilege have played a massive role since the Declaration of Independence became a longstanding document that we still use in this country. This idea of all men are created equal, we discussed last time, is actually more talking about what we would consider the ultimate agent, someone who is probably white, rich, land-owning, cisgendered, heterosexual, and male. That is a very specific subset that probably has the most privilege out of any group in the United States. And that was that main subset that was present in that room when the Declaration of Independence was written. And henceforth, they would be talking about themselves. So that's why this idea of white supremacy culture has been a part of the United States since the United States was founded. Alongside that, we also talked about tenets of white supremacy. So things that we see in our everyday life that were born out of white supremacy culture and sustained through white supremacy culture. So things like perfectionism, defensiveness, fear of open conflict, belief in one right way. That's a very small set of examples, but there's a very long list of examples that we talked about last time. And these things really keep us from having collaborative, equitable spaces because we are so caught up in the I and the very selfish ways of thinking about how we go about the world and how power and privilege play a role in that. And again, this applies to not just theater, but our everyday life as well. All right, so we're gonna dive in. What is DEI? We hear DEI, EDI, D and I. We hear so many different versions of this acronym. And why is it important? Why should we even care about what this is? Here are the basics of the definitions of DEI. DEI, as we know, is just an acronym. And no matter what sort of, what's the words I'm looking for? What order the letters go in, right? They all stand for diversity, equity, and inclusion or inclusivity in some way, shape, or form. Diversity can simply be defined as the spectrum of human attributes, perspectives, identities, and backgrounds that we all have in our everyday life. So these are things like our race, our class, our gender, our background, so how we were raised, who raised us. It has to do with class, it has to do with ability versus disability and accessibility. All of those things define who we are. And remember, all of our identities are intersectional, meaning that there are parts of our identities that make us agents in a scenario and parts of our identities that make us targets in the scenario. And it doesn't mean that it's good or bad. It's just who we are. It's how our world works. So the example that I've been using a lot in these trainings is that myself as a Black, queer, non-binary person, those identities make me a part of target groups because those are marginalized identities versus the fact that I am college educated, I have a full-time job, I have health insurance, I'm able to operate in a world of academia and business. So I would be considered an agent in those regards as well because I have power and privilege in those worlds. Equity. This idea, we've talked a little bit about equity in the last couple of sessions, but equity here is recognizing that historical and contemporary oppression exists. And we're acknowledging that these different sort of communities that we all inhabit require different types and levels of support at any given time so that we can all thrive and not just survive, right? So remember, we talked about this definition a couple sessions ago, but institutional power, which is what we would consider access and control that's been embedded into our society for years and years and years, that's been afforded to an agent group, plus the privilege. So the fact that others get things that others do not, is where we get this idea of oppression. So when we're talking about historical and contemporary oppression, right, it's not just what the Declaration of Independence was alluding to with that group of people that were in that room when that document was written, but it's also talking about how that document has been enacted in our everyday society. So when we're talking about historical and contemporary oppressions, all of those things help define what we all need and what we all might not need, and what sort of accessibility that we all might need or not need. So equity has a lot to do with diversity and inclusion, even though we don't necessarily talk about the E of DEI as much. And then there's, of course, inclusion, which I feel like we all sort of have a working definition of inclusion, but it's important to define still. Inclusion is a dynamic state of operating in which any individual or group can feel respected, valued, safe, and fully engaged. Now, that list of 4 things at the end is very important here: respected, valued, safe, and fully engaged. Because we can have 1 or 2 of those things and still not be in an inclusive state or feel included in something. We'll talk more about that as we move forward. Okay. These are really important things to remind ourselves of when we're talking about DEI. The first time that I was really taught this was probably at least 3 years ago, but I always thought that each of these things could operate individually or by themselves, and it's still accurate. It still makes sense. It doesn't, at least not in the sort of work that we're trying to do to create more equitable spaces. You cannot have inclusion without diversity. What I mean by that is that it is very easy to think about our society as a society of hegemony, meaning a society of sameness, and a society of oneness. So we think about what's it called? School of Rock, right? The Great American Melting Pot that we all grew up with that song. At least like millennials definitely grew up with not School of Rock. What is that thing called? Schoolhouse Rock. There it is. We all were taught this song about how everyone came to America and we became equal so easily, and everyone's always collaborating, everyone's always feels safe and invited to the table. That's not the case. That's not the case. We are not a melting pot as people who live in America. I like to say it's more of like a chopped salad. we're all technically in the same bowl, but we don't always see eye to eye. We're not necessarily equal in pieces or quantities or importance, depending on who you ask, what scenarios we're in, and how high these stakes are. We are not the same, and we really shouldn't be, because that idea of sameness gets rid of diversity entirely. So it takes this idea of who we are and how we've been raised and how we see the world and those parts of our identities and throws them out the window. And it doesn't make any sense, because it's one thing to include people. It's another thing to completely ignore who they are. We cannot include people without also acknowledging their humanity and where they come from and where they're going. And unfortunately, these conversations happen a lot without also talking about diversity, because we think, oh, if everyone's invited to the table, everyone is equal, right? Everyone has what they need, potentially. That's not really what's going on. You can invite people to the table, but unless they have a seat, unless they have a place setting, unless they are served what everyone else is served, or served what they need at that table to feel like they've been fed, then there's no point. Right? There is no diversity there. It's only inclusion because they've been invited to that table just like everybody else has been invited. And at the same time, not everyone's invited to the table to begin with. And we'll talk more about that when we talk about the next section of this. So as we're talking about the Declaration of Independence, it's important to remember that all never meant all, right? All really only applied to that group of people that were in that room when that document was written and signed. So we are all technically included because we all live in America. And if we're talking about citizenship, yes, everyone would be considered an American citizen if they have that citizenship. But that does not mean that they are celebrated for who they are, for their cultural and diverse backgrounds. It just means that they are all kind of there. They're all present. It doesn't account for how they're treated when they're there. And that's what I mean by power dynamics playing a key role here, because you can be invited there, but it depends on who else is at that table, whether or not they choose to accept you. So that creates more of that power dynamic there, those agents and targets, and who created the table, who set the table in the first place, who made the table, who made the room where the table was built, right? All of these sort of things about that metaphor have to do with why hegemony can be so dangerous. A great example of why inclusion cannot exist without diversity is colorblind casting, right? I learned about colorblind casting my freshman year of college. And my professor at the time told us, as a Black man, that he had been invited into several rooms. He auditioned for these great shows, especially Shakespeare. And on day one, day two of rehearsals, it became very clear that the director did not understand that actors of color, unless they were told otherwise, were playing white characters. By that, I mean, and if the character in a play, it does not have a specific race, and you say that you are casting regardless of race, and you get in the room and you do not acknowledge the diversity that is in that room. So right now we're talking specifically about race, but this can apply to any subset, to any background or sense of diversity and definition of that word. If you don't have an active conversation about it, then suddenly everyone in that room is playing a white character. Right, so he would go into an audition space, or he'd go on the first day of rehearsal and go up to a director and say, "Great, what race is my character?" And the director would say, "What do you mean? You're playing yourself." And they said, "Well, no, I'm playing a character. You need to tell me what race my character is." And because, again, there's that automatic power dynamic in that room between that director and that actor, the director has that power. The director has the agency and the privilege of deciding what is most important for them to tell that story. So whether they tell the actor, "Oh, you play whoever you want to play," or "Yes, of course, play yourself," that's still not a direct answer. So a lot of times my professor would be playing a white person, pretending to be a white person. And I find myself having that same experiences if I go into an audition room and I'm not directly told what race the character I'm playing is, especially in something like Shakespeare, where we all agree or think that these are homogenous characters. They're not, unless they're otherwise identified, like in Othello, for example, right? So it's important to have those conversations, because inclusion is nothing without the conversation of diversity at the same time. And on the other side of that, you also cannot have diversity without inclusion. One of my favorite ways of thinking about this is what I call the birthday party metaphor. We all have heard something like this. We all have experienced something like this. I definitely remember being this kid. I remember being invited to birthday parties as a child to kids in my class who I wasn't really friends with. And you've got parents who are thinking to themselves, "Okay, it's my kid's birthday, and I want to just invite their friends." But it could be considered disrespectful or unfair if I only invite like 5 kids from this class. So I have to invite the whole class, otherwise it's unfair, right? I have to include everyone. And you're thinking to yourself, it's going to be diverse because you've got a group full of kids who identify as boys, as girls, as non-binary kids, or gender non-conforming. They all have different levels of ability. Great, they're all invited. They're all going to show up. That's awesome. They're all going to have a good time, right? Then the kids get there and they're not appreciated, right? They might get a slice of cake. They all sing happy birthday. Then the other kids go off and play because they're not friends with the birthday kid. They're not friends with the friends of the birthday kid. They're not included in that group. So again, they've been invited to the table, but no one has asked them what they need. So they're included. And so this, like, we talked about that list of 4, right? So feeling respected, feeling valued, feeling safe, and feeling engaged. So you can be respected by being invited to the birthday party. Do you feel safe when you're at that birthday party? Probably not if it was just a pity invite, right? Or an obligatory invite. Do you feel valued? Probably not, because it was an obligatory invite. And are you engaged? No, because that group is over there playing and having a good old time without you. You were invited to the table because you had to be invited, because you had to be included. But no one is celebrating the diversity in the room. No one's is celebrating who you are as well. So that kid might be respected technically by getting the invite, but they are not safe. They are not feeling valued, and they don't feel engaged as well. So again, it's really important when we're talking about DEI that you cannot have diversity without inclusion. You cannot have inclusion without diversity. They have to work hand in hand. I love this quote a lot. This is from my good friend, Matthew Reynolds, who runs Matthew Reynolds Consulting. When I found this quote, I immediately said, "Yep, we got to put this in the in the presentation because I think this beautifully sums up what I'm trying to say here. I'm going to read it. If we are only focusing on diversity, we have done nothing without inclusivity. If the solution is to come from the perspective of our differences instead of our shared humanity, then it is easy to see why our living and upholding humanity is such a struggle. We need to create a new lens of viewing each other, acknowledge and embrace our diversity, embrace inclusion, and allow our new truth vision to better the world around us. It is time to celebrate and care for humanity. When we truly embrace, honor, and live as humans, no matter our inward being or outward appearance, that's when we reach a point of inclusion. Inclusion cannot be achieved without knowing, using, and loving who we are as humans and citizens of the world. There are a lot of reasons why I love this quote. And there are a lot of reasons why I can see others saying like, oh, okay, but I don't get it still. I don't understand. And not necessarily even I don't understand. It's more of like, this seems too good to be true, right? It'd be great if we could all be happy and go lucky and have a good time together, but is that even possible? Are we even able to do something like that? And I think one of the most important parts of a conversation about what DEI is and why we all need to be pursuing DEI in our everyday lives and really working towards that sense of equity within DEI is that we need to be more human forward with everything that we do. And by that, I mean, a lot of where we are in this day and age is about institutional power, right? That idea of access and control that's been embedded into our society since the beginning of this country's inception. So that institutional power and how institutions operate within our society means that we are valuing institutions over people, right? People are upholding those institutions, the physical institutions, meaning organizations and businesses, but also the institution that is our country, right? And the ideals and the moral belief that our country is founded under. We care so much more about that melting pot theory, about where we come from ideally, right? Or ideologically. But when it comes down to individual people, it's very difficult for us to value people from where they are because it's really hard. There's a lot of time and energy and focus that a lot of people just don't have right now because everybody is busy surviving, right? So when we really boil it down, if we are not willing to acknowledge and celebrate who everyone is on a base level, based on their diversity, based on including them so that everyone can feel respected, valued, safe, and engaged, then we're doing everyone a disservice. We cannot say that we want inclusion without celebrating diversity. We cannot say that we're celebrating diversity if we're not including everyone so that they all feel respected, valued, safe, and engaged. Okay. Now, in this conversation about diversity and inclusion, equity is kind of what pulls it all together. Okay. So we talked a little bit about this last week, or a lot of bit about this last week in our discussion section of the session. But I loved this a little bit more, and I'm glad that I changed up the graphic that we're using here. So inequality here on this upper left-hand corner is unequal access to opportunities. So as you can see, there's one child that's getting an apple and one child that's not from this giving tree. If you go down to equality, right, you've got this idea that, okay, yeah, evenly distributed power and tools and assistance to get to that apple tree. But still, there's a child that is able to pick apples and a child that's not able to pick apples. So they're given the same tools, they're given the same assistance, the same things to be able to access that tree and access those apples. But still, there's a person who cannot reach that tree. Then we have equity, right? This idea of having custom tools that identify and address inequality from the root. So the idea of giving everyone what they need, when they need it, how they need it, so that they can have and achieve that success and greatness that we're all looking for, right? So you've got one person who's got a slightly shorter ladder and a bag, right? And then they're able to get what they need. You have another person here, I had to move my little face so I can see. You have another person here with a slightly taller tree and also a bag, and they're able to reach that tree. And that's awesome. We love that. But at the end of the day, that's also not really fixing the issues and the problems that we have here. So equity is the goal a lot of ways here, right? Of giving people what they need so that they can succeed in the world. And when you're talking about diversity and inclusion along with equity, helping and celebrating people where they're at based on who they are, how they identify, what their background is. So really celebrating that diversity and then making sure that people are feeling respected, safe, valued, and engaged. Also means that you're giving them what they need in that moment so they can feel respected, safe, valued, and engaged. The process of doing that, we start to unravel and see why our systems at play currently in the Western world do not work. That's why this battle can be so hard. That's why conversations about DEI and sustaining conversations about DEI and action with DEI in mind can be so hard because of this bottom right-hand graphic that we've got here. The idea that justice and liberation do not exist in the ways that they should, so that we can make this a little bit easier for everyone. Not just those in points of power, not just those who are being targeted, but everybody at the same time. So justice here is fixing the system to offer equal access and both tools and opportunities. Meaning, when the Declaration of Independence was written, right, and we were only talking about that group of people that were in that room who wrote and signed that document, that started this idea of what this institution, what this country is supposed to stand for. So as time has gone on, that is what we've been operating with. And as we can all see, there are massive, massive parts of our political system, of our government system, that fail us as human citizens, as American citizens, right? So because we're not celebrating who we are as a diverse nation, because a lot of us, no matter our background, do not feel safe and respected and valued and engaged in this country and in conversations about this country, because a lot of us do not have the tools that we need to be able to access the things that we need to feel equitable in scenarios, there is no justice. So in this bottom right-hand graphic, you see they fixed the tree. They propped it back up so that everyone has a little bit more access, right? And they're pulling it from the other side so that it really is a little bit more balanced. So it means they fixed everything at the root so that everyone could have even better access. So there's still equity, right? There's still everyone having whatever tools they need to be able to pick from that tree. But at the same time, the tree itself was fixed. The system that we operate in right now is one of the main reasons why DEI can be so difficult, because we're trying to fix something that technically is not broken. By that, I mean the systems at play work exactly how they were meant to work. Meaning that when the Declaration of Independence was written, and when this country was founded as the United States of America, the ways that this country is founded, those ideals are still ingrained in who we are. The system that was created is still working perfectly. Why? Because that system did not value equity, did not value diversity, did not value inclusion. So now we're in a world that does not value equity, that does not value diversity, that does not value inclusion. We can talk way more about that in discussion, but I hope that makes sense, this idea that there's nothing broken about the system. The system is working exactly as it should, but that's why things do not work the way that we need it to work now, because we're finally seeing more of why our world and why our systems at play do not feel great for us. Because this is where we started. It's only gotten us to this idea of confusion and that burden of, okay, clearly something is wrong, but what do we do? How do we fix it? How do we go about making sure that we all are valued? Oh, there it is. All right, so putting it all together. I kind of did a little bit of that before I even hit the, the next slide. But I love this drawing, and you'll see this in lots of different ways. If you literally just Google DEI Venn diagrams, these types of things will come up, and there's different versions of it. This is one of my favorite versions, though. When you are able to cross and work together with both inclusion, or not both, with inclusion, equity, and diversity all at the same time, that is where we get the sense of belonging. This idea that we are all meant to be here. We all have a right to be here. We want to be here. That is where this world, that is where we all want to be. We all want to feel like we have a right to be here, to be on this planet. We all want to feel like we are welcome to the table. But when we get to that table, it should be abundantly clear to every single person there that they are celebrated for who they are. They are accepted for who they are, that they are valued, that they are respected and safe and engaged in that conversation about just how decisions are made, and that they have everything they need to be able to access that information. They have everything they need to be able to be the happiest, best versions of themselves. They want to feel like they belong. We all want to feel like we belong. So now that we've got this idea of like, what is this figured out? Now, what do we do? Where do we go from here? This is where I have to start wrapping up because I'm getting really excited and starting to slow down. So we've asked ourselves this question each session, but I want to keep bringing it back. It's one of my favorite questions that Matthew Reynolds always asks. How much of your thinking is your thinking? How much of who you are and how you've lived your life is fueled by what you've learned? How did the person who taught you what you learn what they learned? Right? And then going back generations and generations and generations. We all have seen how our country has gotten from inception to now. Several wars, right? We've had enslavement of several different types. We've had inequality of several different types. We've had injustice of countless and countless types, right? So we have to really start to engage with this question of like, how much of me is me? How much of me is what I've been taught? How much of what I've been taught is based in inequity? How much of what I've been taught is based in oppression? How much of what I've been taught is based in institutional power and who has it and who hasn't? Allyship, the basics of allyship, bring into question how much of our thinking is our thinking and what do we do about that answer? So the true definition of allyship is an active, consistent, and arduous practice of unlearning and reevaluating, in which a person in a position of privilege and power, an agent, seeks to operate in solidarity with a marginalized group, a target, right? Allyship is a lifelong process. It doesn't end. It never will end, and it shouldn't ever end. This process is all about building relationships that are based on trust, consistency, and accountability with those who have been systematically targeted. So from the beginning of that Declaration of Independence being written to now, the folks who have not been considered an agent group in any way, shape, or form, those are the people that we need to be making sure are feeling safe, respected, valued, and engaged in every decision that is being made, personally and politically, and on a micro level, on a macro level as well. And I'm gonna keep saying this over and over and over because I think we all get stuck on this idea sometimes. Some parts of our identity will always, always, always classify us as an agent, while other parts of our identity will always, always, always classify us as a target. That is why we are all capable of being allies, why we all have the capacity of being an ally, because we all have experienced both agent groups and target groups. We all have experience in our diversity of who we are, of being agents and targets. So how do we decide who is an ally and who isn't an ally? Most important part of this conversation, and we'll talk way more about this next time, is the fact that only a target is allowed to identify and define who an ally is and how much of an ally they are being. Why? Because it's the target group that's being targeted. It's a target group that's being affected by this, not the agent group, right? So agents are incredibly capable of being allies, but only targets are able of identifying allies from agents, okay? Allyship is an active verb. It is constant, it is consistent. Okay, it is not enough to just call yourself an ally. You must work towards that title and have that target group identify you as such. It means the work is being done. If an ally is an ally, that means that they are aligning, right? They are aligning themselves with that target group. They are using their privilege to help others get what they need to help achieve that beautiful diversity, that equity, and that inclusion. Okay. Performative allyship is so easy to fall into. this is a conversation that we've been having a lot, especially since 2020. It's very easy to say something on social media. It's very easy to say something in passing to someone who you care about. But unless you're backing up those words with action, it doesn't really mean anything. Not because you don't want it to mean anything, but because how much of that is actually changing something for that target group, right? So there was that whole time in 2020 with the unfortunate death and murder of George Floyd, right? Where people were posting black squares all over Instagram and Facebook, all over social media. And there was a lot of Asian groups that were doing it. And there were a lot of targets, AKA Black people, who were saying, this is not really helping anything. You uploaded a black screen and that's supposed to help us do something, right? There's no money being raised. There's no awareness actually going out into the world. It's just a black square. It was considered performative because there was nothing to back up that action. So the targets called out the agents and said, you're not being allies right now. Do better, be better, educate yourselves, right? Do the work. And next time we'll talk all about how that work can be done, specific action items of how we can get this work done. And remember, again, we are all agents and targets at different times. So everyone is doing work and should be doing that work at any given time. Important things to remember in this conversation. This work is not easy, and it's okay that we get a little overwhelmed sometimes, okay? These systems have been created and sustained since the beginning of this country's inception. So it's going to take just as much time and energy and practice to dismantle those systems at play. It's okay. Take a breath. We're all trying to figure it out at the same time. This is not about perfection. That is a tenet of white supremacy. It does not help us to try and be perfect in this scenario. What does help us is being the best versions of ourselves so that we can work towards that diversity, that equity, and that inclusion by being better allies to one another, okay? If a target tells you that you're not being an ally, do not fight them on it. Do not try and defend yourself and say, but I did this and I did that and I did this. It's not about getting our feelings hurt. It's about listening. It's about providing what these targets might need so that they can feel like they have what they need to thrive and not just survive. They're calling you out to call you back in again. They're telling you, hey, this is not working. We need something more. We need something different than this. It is that ally's job, if they are considered an ally by that target group, to do better, to listen. And again, we'll talk all about what those action items are next time. All of our identities are intersectional, and we all have a responsibility in the work that needs to be done to create that equity, okay? DEI, my friends, is not a quick fix. This is why a lot of people get really tired really easily of talking about DEI, because we have a sense of urgency, another white supremacy tenet, right? We get really, really anxious about it's not done yet. Why isn't the work done? I want it done now. It's not how this works. It took centuries for us to get to where we are right now. The systems at play have been perfected. They work just as they were meant to work. So it's going to take a lot of time for us all to figure it out, to dismantle those systems at play. It's okay. Burnout is real, but at the same time, we have to learn how to sustain ourselves better, to take care of ourselves so that we can also take care of each other. Questioning our belief system is always the first step. Always ask yourself, how much of my thinking is my thinking? If you find yourself getting defensive, if you find yourself having a moment of feeling overwhelmed or unaware and you don't really know what's going on, just ask, how much of what I'm thinking right now and I'm feeling is mine? How much of what I'm experiencing right now is something that's genuinely something I'm experiencing? And how much of that is being influenced by what I've been taught? And how much of what I've been taught is actually truth in this scenario? It's okay to call ourselves out. It's really important and essential to call ourselves out. And finally, I'm going to say it again. Human forward, human first, always, 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 always. These institutions have been at play for centuries. That's America, that's theaters, that's every sort of institution that exists in this country. We get really, really intense about these systems, and we forget about the people that are running those systems. Forget about the people that are affected by those systems. We need to pay attention to the humans. We need to put them and ourselves first in that conversation. Ask ourselves how much of that thinking is our thinking. Really be real about what it means for us to feel respected and safe and valued and engaged every day. To ask ourselves, do I feel celebrated in my identities? And if I'm a part of an agent group in a certain scenario, what does that mean to be an agent? What does that mean if I feel like I'm also a target in scenarios? How do I work towards equity? Okay, so next session, we'll be talking about active steps towards building and sustaining community and allyship in theater. That's when we will do a step-by-step, play-by-play of what can we do? What are specific action items that can be taken so that we can do better, so that we can be better for ourselves and each other? All right, thank you so much. We can now have a conversation, have questions, and of course, I include my sources as well, and I'll make sure everyone has access to this recording.